The Galactic Alliance was the ruling force of the galaxy, an intricate web of powerful species bound by treaties and mutual benefit. Their influence stretched across planets, systems, and civilizations, and for eons, they controlled everything from trade routes to military operations. They believed they were the epitome of order and structure, above any chaotic instincts that might plague lesser beings. In their eyes, humanity was one of those lesser beings. The humans, new to the galactic stage, had only recently been granted membership into the Alliance. And even then, it had been begrudgingly. They were unpredictable, impulsive, and unrefined. No one in the Alliance believed humans could ever be more than a minor footnote in galactic history. Among the elite of the Alliance stood Vexer, a highly decorated spy from one of the oldest races. He was known for his cold efficiency, his loyalty to the Alliance unquestionable. For years, Vexer had completed mission after mission, gathering intelligence that kept the Alliance ahead of their enemies. He had earned their trust, even if they viewed him as little more than a tool. But he never cared for their approval. He lived for the mission, for the precision of his craft. His most recent assignment, however, would change everything. The mission was critical: retrieve data from a neutral world that could turn the tide of a brewing war. The information Vexer was tasked with collecting would expose a new strategic weakness in one of the Alliance's greatest enemies. If delivered in time, it could ensure a decisive victory. But things didn't go as planned. On the verge of completing his mission, Vexer was intercepted. The data was compromised, and soon after, the Alliance received a report. Vexer had been caught attempting to sell the intel to the highest bidder. A traitor. The accusation was swift, and so was the judgment. There was no trial, no chance for Vexer to explain himself. The Alliance did not tolerate failure, let alone treason. Vexer's name was scrubbed from their records, his reputation shattered. He was disavowed, labeled an enemy of the state, and abandoned. Vexer found himself dumped on a desolate planet, a barren wasteland far from any trade routes or communication channels. He was left with nothing, no equipment, no food, no hope of escape. The Alliance had made their decision, and to them, it was final. His death would serve as a silent warning to anyone else who might think of betraying their trust. As he watched his ship disappear into the sky, a hollow emptiness settled over him. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. He paced the cracked surface of the planet, replaying the events that led to his downfall. None of it made sense. He had never been disloyal. The mission was clear, and he had followed orders. Someone had orchestrated this, but the why and the how eluded him. Was it jealousy? A political move? Or had he simply been used as a scapegoat? Whatever the reason, none of it mattered now. His own people had cast him aside, convinced he was a traitor unworthy of even a second glance. His anger burned hot, but it was quickly smothered by a deeper feeling: betrayal. He had dedicated his life to the Alliance, and this was his reward. To be left on this forsaken world, doomed to die alone, with nothing but his thoughts for company. The cruelty of it twisted inside him. The landscape around him reflected his inner turmoil. Sharp, jagged cliffs jutted out from the earth, casting long shadows under the twin suns. The ground was littered with debris, remnants of long-forgotten battles, or perhaps wreckage from other poor souls who had been abandoned here. There were no signs of life, no animals, no vegetation. Just the silence and the oppressive weight of his isolation. Vexer tried to fight the overwhelming sense of despair. He was a survivor, trained to adapt to the most extreme circumstances. He wouldn't go down without a fight. But with each passing hour, as the suns began to sink beneath the horizon, the reality of his situation became harder to ignore. There was no rescue coming. There would be no redemption. In the darkness he sat, his thoughts spiraling. The Alliance, the galaxy, the years of service, it all seemed so far away now. It was ironic, really. He had spent his life gathering information, always one step ahead of his enemies, but in the end, it had all been for nothing. He had been blindsided, caught in a trap that he never saw coming. As the cold night crept in, Vexer stared up at the stars, those distant, unreachable points of light. Somewhere out there, the Alliance continued without him, unbothered by his fate. They had discarded him like a broken tool, assuming he would die quietly and fade into obscurity. But Vexer wasn't ready to fade. Despite the suffocating isolation, despite the hopelessness of his situation, something inside him refused to give in. He had been betrayed, yes, but he wasn't dead yet. He would find a way to survive. He would prove them wrong. And as he lay there, the faintest glimmer of hope began to stir. He had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, and somehow, he was still here. If there was any chance of escape, any chance at all, he would find it. The Alliance had made a mistake, and he was determined to make them regret it. He didn't know how long he would last on this forsaken rock, but one thing was certain: Vexer wasn't done yet. The human crew wasn't exactly glamorous. They weren't part of some grand intergalactic fleet or one of the Alliance's elite units. No, they were scavengers, operating on the fringes of known space, combing through forgotten battlefields and derelict worlds for whatever they could salvage. Their ship, the Orion, was small, barely state-of-the-art, but dependable. It was crewed by a handful of engineers, scientists, and a few military veterans who had seen their share of conflict. They were resourceful, used to operating in places where others feared to tread. On a routine sweep through an uncharted sector, something caught their attention, a faint signal coming from a barren planet, one that shouldn't have been there. Curious, they changed course. Their scanners picked up no life signs initially, just a weak pulse of energy that seemed almost out of place on such an inhospitable world. They had seen this type of signal before. Sometimes it meant wreckage worth scavenging, maybe even tech that could be sold for a good price. It was a gamble, but they were used to taking those. As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, they quickly realized this wasn't just any random find. The terrain was brutal, lifeless. But then there it was, a figure, barely moving, surrounded by the harsh landscape. The crew was stunned when their scans revealed it was alive, just barely. An alien, and judging by the readings, a member of the Alliance. But this one was different. They landed nearby and cautiously approached, unsure of what they were dealing with. When they saw the state he was in, weak, on the edge of death, it took them a moment to process what they were seeing. An Alliance spy, left to die. They recognized him almost immediately, his face and reputation known even on the fringes of the galaxy. Vexer, the supposed traitor, abandoned by his own people. For a moment, they hesitated. The Alliance didn't take kindly to interference, especially from humans. To be caught harboring an enemy of the state, even one the Alliance had already discarded, could spell trouble. They should have left him there. It would have been the smart thing to do. But something about the scene didn't sit right with them. What kind of civilization leaves one of their own to die like this? The decision wasn't unanimous, but the captain made the final call. They were taking him with them. Whether it was curiosity or compassion that drove them, none of the crew could say. It was a risk, but they believed in second chances, even if the Alliance didn't. The worst-case scenario was that Vexer was guilty, in which case they'd deal with it when the time came. But if there was more to the story, then they weren't going to turn their backs on someone who might have been wronged. As they carefully loaded Vexer onto their ship, the tension in the air was palpable. What had happened here? How had a highly ranked spy been left to rot on a planet in the middle of nowhere? The Alliance was cold, but even they didn't usually discard valuable assets so carelessly. Something about this stunk of politics, of something deeper than the simple tale of treason that had circulated across the stars. Vexer, barely conscious, was disoriented, struggling to make sense of his surroundings. He had expected death, to be left alone until the elements finally claimed him. But instead, here he was, being rescued by humans. Of all the species in the galaxy, it was the humans who had found him. The ones who were still treated like outsiders by the Alliance, despite their growing presence in galactic affairs. They were the last beings he had expected to show him any mercy. His first instinct was suspicion. The humans brought him aboard their ship, providing him with the medical attention he desperately needed. Their technology was primitive compared to what he was used to, but it was effective enough. As they worked to stabilize him, Vexer watched them warily. These were the same species the Alliance barely tolerated, the ones seen as unpredictable and inferior by the older races. And yet, they had risked themselves to save him. He couldn't understand their motives. Why save a traitor? They had to know who he was, what he was accused of. He expected hostility or at least indifference, but instead they showed him care. One of the crew, an engineer, sat by his side as he slowly regained strength. "You're lucky we found you," she said, her voice surprisingly warm. Vexer wanted to ask why they had bothered, but the words wouldn't come. His body was weak, his mind clouded by exhaustion. Days passed, and Vexer grew stronger, though his confusion deepened. The humans treated him not as a prisoner but as a guest. They asked questions, what had happened, how he had ended up here, but never pressed him for answers he wasn't ready to give. They seemed curious, not accusatory. There was a strange sense of openness among them, a lack of the cold calculation he had come to expect from the other species in the Alliance. In the quiet moments, Vexer couldn't help but reflect on his situation. He had been betrayed by his own people, abandoned without a second thought. The Alliance had deemed him expendable, and yet here he was, alive because a group of humans had decided his life was worth saving. The idea unsettled him. No one in the Alliance would have done the same. To them, he was already dead the moment the accusation of treason was made. Vexer remained cautious, unsure of what the humans wanted from him. Were they expecting something in return? Did they see him as some sort of asset to be exploited? He had been trained to expect deception at every turn, to trust no one, and yet these humans, they didn't act like the others. They treated him with a kind of casual kindness, as if saving him had been the most natural thing in the world. As Vexer watched them interact with one another, he noticed something he hadn't seen in the Alliance: genuine camaraderie. They joked, they argued, but there was a warmth there, a sense of belonging that was absent in the cold bureaucracy of the Alliance's hierarchy. It was strange, unsettling even. How could a species so new to the galactic stage, so dismissed by the powers that be, have something the Alliance lacked? The more time he spent among them, the more the lines between ally and enemy blurred. He had expected cruelty, exploitation, perhaps even violence. But instead, the humans had shown him something he had never experienced before: compassion, unreserved and freely given. It made him question everything he thought he knew. Vexer's recovery aboard the human ship was slow but steady. His body, weakened from days of exposure and neglect, began to heal under the care of the crew. They gave him time, space, and unexpectedly, kindness. Each day, he observed them more closely, studying their interactions. They were different from the species he had encountered in the Alliance. Where others might have been cold or purely practical, the humans were warm. They worked together with a sense of camaraderie he found puzzling at first. They joked even in the face of danger, and more surprising still, they seemed driven by an unwavering sense of what was right. At first, Vexer remained guarded, unsure of their motives. But as time passed, the walls he had carefully built around himself started to crack. He began to talk to them, first in brief, cautious sentences, then longer as his trust in them grew. He wasn't used to feeling this way. Trust was a luxury he could never afford in the Alliance. But these humans were different. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't demand answers or secrets, only offering a strange sense of acceptance. One night, as the ship floated silently through space, the captain approached him. She was sharp, observant, and carried herself with a quiet authority. Vexer had grown to respect her over the weeks. She asked him what had happened, her tone gentle but direct. It was a question she had been holding back until he was ready to answer. For the first time, Vexer spoke of the mission. He told her how he had been sent to retrieve vital intelligence that could have shifted the course of the war. He had followed every directive, every protocol. And yet, at the last moment, the data he was supposed to deliver had been compromised. The next thing he knew, the Alliance had branded him a traitor. He had no trial, no chance to defend himself. The betrayal had been swift, and the punishment final. The captain listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as he spoke. Something about his story didn't add up. If Vexer had truly been a traitor, why had the Alliance abandoned him without making a spectacle of it? The Alliance loved public punishments, making examples of those who crossed them. But instead they had left him to die in the quiet of an unknown planet. It didn't make sense. The crew began working quietly behind the scenes. They had access to certain backdoor channels and old Alliance logs, remnants of their time operating on the fringes of space. The captain wasn't one to take things at face value. If Vexer believed he had been framed, she was determined to uncover the truth. She enlisted the help of the ship's engineer and hacker, who began digging through encrypted communications and fragmented data streams from the time of Vexer's mission. What they found confirmed their suspicions. Old communication logs revealed inconsistencies in the reports surrounding Vexer's mission. The intel he had tried to deliver had been tampered with, by someone inside the Alliance itself. A high-ranking official, one with considerable influence, had orchestrated the frame. The humans cross-referenced the timelines, the encrypted messages, and the sudden movements within the Alliance's command structure. All the evidence pointed to a singular figure, an official who had not only hated Vexer's rise in the ranks but also harbored a deep resentment toward humans. This official had sought to sabotage Vexer's mission for personal gain, ensuring the intelligence never reached the Alliance while simultaneously ruining Vexer's career. The captain presented the evidence to Vexer. As he stared at the data, piecing together the conspiracy, a wave of emotions washed over him. The Alliance, which he had devoted his life to, had betrayed him not out of a need for justice but because of petty jealousy and political maneuvering. Worse still, they had destroyed him to protect their fragile ego. Vexer's faith in the system he had served so loyally was shattered. The organization he believed was above reproach, the one he had sacrificed everything for, had turned on him without a second thought. And all because of a single official's hatred of humanity. Vexer didn't know what to feel. He had believed so deeply in the Alliance's superiority, in its ability to bring order and control to the chaos of the galaxy. But the humans, the ones who were always dismissed, always underestimated, had uncovered the truth and protected him. They didn't owe him anything. Yet here they were, risking their lives to help him when his own people had discarded him like trash. It was a strange realization, one that left him conflicted. How could he reconcile the cold efficiency of the Alliance with the warmth and morality of the humans? The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The humans weren't driven by political ambitions or power struggles. They didn't operate under the same rigid, hierarchical systems that the other species did. They were unpredictable, yes, but that unpredictability came from a place of humanity, a word he had never fully understood until now. In the quiet moments aboard the ship, Vexer began to bond with the crew. He shared more about his experiences, and in turn, they shared stories of their own. It was in these moments that he realized something profound. The humans operated on trust. Not blind trust, but the kind that was earned through actions and shared experiences. They believed in each other, even when they disagreed. It was something that Vexer had never experienced within the rigid confines of the Alliance. But the more their investigation uncovered, the greater the danger became. Vexer knew the Alliance would not let this conspiracy be exposed. If they ever discovered the humans had taken him in, the consequences would be severe. They had risked everything to help him, and Vexer found himself caught between two worlds. The Alliance had turned its back on him, but the humans had shown him what loyalty and friendship truly meant. The bond he had formed with them was undeniable. For the first time in his life, Vexer felt part of something real, something not based on duty or fear, but on mutual respect and trust. The betrayal of the Alliance cut deep, but the human's loyalty had begun to fill that void, slowly rebuilding something inside him that he thought had been destroyed. Yet with the conspiracy now laid bare, they all knew that a decision was looming. Would they confront the Alliance? Or would they protect themselves by keeping the truth hidden? For Vexer, the choice was clear. He could no longer stand by the lies and corruption of the Alliance. The humans had given him a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The quiet hum of the ship's systems was abruptly shattered by alarms blaring through the corridors. The crew of the Orion snapped to attention. The scanners had picked up something, a fleet closing in fast. They had been found. It didn't take long for Vexer to understand what was happening. The Alliance had discovered that he was still alive, that the humans had rescued him. The official who had orchestrated his downfall wasn't going to let this loose end dangle. They weren't just coming to clean up a mess, they were coming to silence the truth. The captain's face was grim as she assessed the situation. The enemy ships vastly outgunned the Orion. Their chances of survival were slim, and everyone on board knew it. But running wasn't an option. If they fled now, the truth would die with them. They had to fight, not just for their lives but for something far bigger. Vexer watched the crew, their faces tense but resolute. There was no fear, only determination. It was a sight that stirred something deep within him. He made his way to the command center, despite still being weak from his injuries. The captain looked at him, a question in her eyes. Vexer had no words to offer, only a steady gaze. He had made his decision. These humans, these misfits, had risked everything for him, a stranger. They had believed in his innocence when his own people had discarded him. He owed them his life, but more than that, he realized now that his loyalty lay with them. They had shown him what real honor meant, and he would not abandon them now. "Let me help," Vexer said, his voice firm. The captain hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She had seen enough of him to know that he wasn't asking out of desperation, but from a place of conviction. With a quick command, the crew shifted, making room for Vexer at the tactical station. His experience as a spy, as someone who had navigated the complexities of warfare for years, kicked in. He began issuing commands, coordinating their defenses, anticipating the enemy's movements with precision. The enemy's ships appeared on the viewports, sleek and menacing, armed with the best technology the Alliance could muster. They had come to crush the humans, to wipe them out without a second thought. Vexer knew the tactics they would use. He had studied them, lived them. He began to instruct the humans on how to exploit small weaknesses in the enemy's formation, weaknesses that only someone intimately familiar with Alliance strategy would know. The first volley of fire hit the Orion, rocking the ship violently. Damage reports flooded in, but the crew didn't falter. They moved with an efficiency that surprised even Vexer. They might not have the advanced tech of the Alliance, but they had something far more valuable: courage, ingenuity, and the will to survive. Each crew member played their part, executing Vexer's instructions flawlessly, using every trick and tactic they could think of to outmaneuver the superior force. As the battle raged, Vexer felt a strange calm settle over him. He had been fighting for so long, but this fight felt different. It wasn't about politics or orders from some distant commander. It was about something far more personal. It was about standing with those who had stood with him when no one else would. Every shot fired, every evasive maneuver taken was fueled by a sense of purpose that Vexer had never felt before. The enemy pressed harder, their ships closing in for what they assumed would be a swift victory. But the humans fought back with ferocity. They used the environment to their advantage, ducking behind asteroids and using the planet's gravity to pull off maneuvers that caught the enemy off guard. Vexer's tactical genius was turning the tide, but it wasn't enough. The Alliance had numbers and firepower on their side. Then, a critical moment came. One of the enemy ships, the command vessel, moved into position for a final assault. If they didn't stop it, the Orion would be destroyed. The crew looked to Vexer, and in that moment, he made the decision that would change everything. He ordered a bold, reckless maneuver, one that no Alliance officer would have dared. The humans hesitated for a split second, but then, with the trust they had placed in him, they followed his lead. The Orion surged forward, straight into the heart of the enemy formation. The crew executed Vexer's plan with precision, using a combination of sheer willpower and daring tactics. The Alliance ships, unprepared for such audacity, faltered. The Orion delivered a crippling blow to the command vessel, disabling its systems. Without their leader, the remaining enemy ships hesitated, just long enough for the humans to gain the upper hand. victory came at a cost. Several crew members were injured, some seriously. The Orion was battered, its systems barely holding together. But they had survived. Against all odds, they had won. The enemy force retreated, limping away in defeat. The humans had done the impossible, not through superior technology, but through sheer determination and a willingness to fight for what was right. As the smoke cleared, Vexer stood in silence, looking at the faces of those who had fought alongside him. They had given everything, not just for themselves but for him, for the truth. He knew now that there was no going back. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't with the Alliance. With the enemy gone, the captain turned to Vexer. "It's time," she said. Vexer nodded. He had made a promise, and now it was time to keep it. Using the ship's communication systems, Vexer broadcasted the truth to the galaxy. He exposed the corruption within the Alliance, the conspiracy that had framed him, and the official who had betrayed not only him, but the ideals the Alliance claimed to stand for. The transmission was sent far and wide, to every corner of the galaxy. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. When the transmission ended, the crew stood in silence. They had won a battle, but they knew the war was far from over. The Alliance wouldn't take this lightly. They would come for them, sooner or later. But for now, they had done what they had set out to do. They had exposed the lies, fought for the truth, and won, even if only for a moment. Vexer looked around at the crew, at the humans who had risked everything for him. He realized that his place was no longer with the Alliance. They had shown him the truth of loyalty, of honor. The humans, with all their flaws and unpredictability, had something the Alliance could never understand, a deep sense of justice, of standing by those who needed them. "I'm staying," Vexer said quietly to the captain. There was no question in his voice, only certainty. His loyalty now lay with the people who had saved him, not with the corrupt system that had betrayed him. The captain nodded, her face unreadable, but in her eyes, Vexer saw understanding. The truth was out. The battle was won. And for the first time in a long time, Vexer felt at peace, knowing he had found something worth fighting for.